Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting back into Dark Ages, to where with this one we dive deeper into the structure of the reformation of how we saw the whole new world set up 7 years in the future with Peter Parker, but also we get into the details of the plan of Apocalypse and what he's looking to achieve with his newly formed team. So let's get into it, but first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back in, we get a bit more detail to how things had changed throughout the 7-year period from the time of the initial blackout. And as you might have guessed, things initially broke out into war, to where in some cases you had people who were just trying to capitalize on the situation, but on a global scale there's battles over borders, resources, ideologies, with everyone having a different take on either what should be done with what's left, or either how the world should be built back up from here forward. But overall, from a result of these wars after the blackout, this then took the death toll up to the billions, and what eventually happened is you had a group of the remaining heroes who had reached out across the world and spread the message that it doesn't have to be this way. But instead, with this world being in a post-apocalyptic state, this could actually be the opportunity for us to rebuild and create something better. And what we end up seeing from here is like the beginning of this network that for the most part is established by Professor X and Jean Grey. Because after getting all these different wars to stop, the remainder of humanity had then begun to make their way over to super cities, to where with time they had begun to thrive, to where in this case the lack of electricity and industrialization, it had also benefited the world from threats like climate change, with humanity thriving and not breaking the world in the process, or wiping each other out of existence. But then also between these super cities around the world, they were all linked together through a powerful telepath in order to keep all the cities connected and keep everyone moving in the direction of a common goal. And it's also here we get to see a bit of what that common goal is when we see that all the super cities across the world, that they essentially point to what at this point is the world's capital, Wakanda. Because it's here where some of the world's greatest thinkers, both with powers and without, that they've been grouped together to figure out a ton of the world's essential needs, whether it be from new ways to produce and preserve agriculture, lighting, refrigeration, shelter. It would all start here, and then the ideas and the resources would then make their way across the world. But then it's after this when we then jump over to Peter and his daughter May, to where on one hand they're kind of having fun with him training her on how to move with stealth, which she doesn't do exactly too well at, with her screaming and having fun while she's swinging. But also what this shows us on a more zoomed in level is how this super city handles security on the outskirts. Because in addition to this, while Peter was out here with his daughter May, he had taken her out to help him put up webs around the perimeter, which in this case, in a time without electricity, they work as a security network in order to alert the town of intruders whenever these webs are broken, with them causing a bell to go off, which would then let their security know when and exactly where there was a breach around their perimeter. And we get a bit of a look at this with both Daredevil and post-apocalyptic Foggy, with Foggy ready to shoot a flare-up to let others know about the breach, but when Matt tells him that this breach was on the southwest corner of the city and there's no need to worry about it because that is the worst place that these intruders could have went to. And what we find out here really quickly is that with the world being in darkness for the most part, creatures of the night like vampires and werewolves, they begin to thrive in this darkness. And so when we go to the southwest corner and we see Blade, Honey Badger, Elsa Bloodstone, who in the case of Elsa, I don't think we talked about her since like Excalibur. Like, it's been a minute. But long story short, she's the daughter of monster hunter Ulysses Bloodstone, so she's definitely not new to this. But then you also have Lord Kenny Wolverine along with them making their way to this breach. And they're more than ready for what they're up against, with Honey Badger sticking her claws into stakes and Lord Kenny coating her claws with molten silver. But from these waves of vampires and werewolves that they pretty much called the Night Horde raids, they would come through regularly, so it wasn't so much of a shock after some time to see vampires and werewolves working together, and in this case with them all attacking the section that seems to be protected by the newer version of the Night Stalkers, and because of that these guys are handled pretty quickly. But on this particular night, one of the vampires does make their way through, to where we see it make its way to go after Tony Stark and Pepper Potts. But even with this happening, this threat, it doesn't last too long, because before you know it, Steve then shows up, he takes off the vampire's head, and it's just done like that. But with Steve coming here, him and Tony haven't seen each other for some time, so initially there's a bit of catching up to do, with Steve having been gone for some time in Europe, which at this point he tells Tony that they're still being ruled with the Iron Fist, and Steve's come here because they need Tony's help. But at this point, Steve then asks Tony for a moment for the two of them to walk and talk, and when they do, you also kind of get this moment where Tony opens up after Steve tells him like, man, I thought you would have felt held back, you know, without having any electricity or anything. And it's here where Tony tells him like, you know what, I kind of do. Because for a number of nights, Tony would just be up imagining all kinds of different inventions that could help the world. But because of the constant global EMP signal going out, Tony also knows that none of these brilliant inventions would ever be turned on. And while they're out here walking, Steve tells Tony, like, what if I told you there was a way that we could turn on all those machines that are running in your mind? And for a moment, Tony's kind of like, okay, Steve, where you going with this? Like, both figuratively and literally, like, where are we walking to? And it's right then when Steve pulls back a branch and it's Apocalypse and Dracula, along with a ton of other vampires and werewolves. And so you know right away with Tony seeing this, he flips. And in response, he quickly pulls out a UV grenade in order to at least take out the vampires and increase his odds a little bit. But when he does, Dracula clearly dodges it and then comes back for Tony, letting him know that he's just incinerated vampires who'd been with Dracula for centuries. But when Tony asks Steve to help him out and get Dracula off of him, Steve then says no and he hits Tony across the face with his shield, only for us then to find out that Steve had been Mystique this whole time, which now kind of begs the question of what happened to Steve or if he's still even alive at this point. But with us seeing this, it then sets us up for a bit of the reveal of what else has been established and growing out there in the world outside of the network and the super cities that the heroes have been creating. Because it's right after this when Apocalypse then takes Tony over to Europe. And it's here where Apocalypse introduces Tony to his solution, which as he would describe as more of an expansion to his former way of thinking, to where once again this story is kind of built on your classic Apocalypse, who had only sought for the strongest mutants to survive and that ordinary Homo sapiens that they practically just weren't worth saving. But with bringing Tony here, he just tells him like, hey, you're gonna work for me. With Tony's mind being, quote, beyond human, end quote. But it's for that exact reason that Apocalypse wants to put Tony to work in order to advance what he's accomplished here, which no one else has been able to do across the world. And what we quickly come to find out is that for one, Apocalypse has brought back electricity. And that's not like the whole plan. Like, we're gonna get deeper into that. Like, electricity isn't the big shabazz here. Like, there's more to it. But with us seeing this and him still needing Tony, like right away it just lets us know that he's going for something huge here. And when he shows this to Tony, right away Tony sees Reed Richards and Riri Williams, who at this point Tony and many others had believed were dead because they had been missing for so long. And initially when Tony tries to go talk to them and ask them why they're here, what are they doing, and Reed just responds like, we're helping En Sabah Nur, which right away throws Tony off like, hey, what is he, threatening you guys or something? But then when Tony asks Apocalypse like, how is he doing this? How is power running through here? And in response, when Apocalypse asks him like, how would you do it, Tony? And in Tony's response, he tells him it would have to be a Faraday cage, which is a structure that will provide an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to counter the EMP signal going across the globe. And Tony even mentions, but like, he tried this with adamantium, with vibranium, but none of those things worked because he could never find that thing to counter the global signal. But the reason we find out that this failed for Tony but it worked for Apocalypse is because he's not using something, but instead he's using someone. And that someone is Magneto, who at this point looks like he's under an excruciating amount of physical stress, with the tubes running out his back and his nails growing super long. And with seeing this, like, one of the things I want to point out here, because I don't think that is really stressed enough. Because though we've seen Magneto pull off a number of great feats and he's proven himself to be the master of magnetism time and time again, and even doing so at times with the precision of a surgeon. But even in the case of Magneto, his limitations lie in his physical limits. Like for example within Children's Crusade, when we had seen him stop a fleet of ships in order to help the Young Avengers save Wanda, but with doing this he was holding these ships still in spite of their thrusters trying to break free, and with doing this Magneto had no shame in telling them that this ain't easy. So hurry up, with sweat beads falling from his face and everything. So just imagine how crazy the situation is here with him being forced to exert this power constantly for who knows how long. But then it's right after this where we're then shown that Apocalypse has been using Zebediah Killgrave, the Purple Man, in order to manipulate the will of everyone here and make them do the bidding of Apocalypse. And as soon as Tony finds this out, it's too late because he's then taken in too, and it's here where we discover, much like Apocalypse had mentioned before, he's doing all of this in order to take the power of the Unmaker, who he had sensed years ago from its awakening, and at this point he's pulling in every resource in order to help him to find a way on how to make that power his, which is definitely old school Apocalypse, all about that evolution. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. All right, later.